What's the creepiest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? Story 1. I saw something crouched in the road one night while driving. Its eyes glowed when my headlights hit it, so I assumed it was an animal of some sort. But when I got within about 15 feet of it, it stood up and looked like a girl standing there. I slammed on my brakes immediately, but suddenly the road was just empty. My friend in the car had not seen anything, but a few minutes later he asked me if it looked like a girl. Apparently, he had seen something similar with his sister a few weeks earlier in the exact same spot. Story 2. I was 15 years old. I was in Los Angeles for a convention and a Disneyland trip. There was a large group of us. My best friend and I were sitting next to each other on the bus. As we were driving from the airport, both my friend and I saw two people exit a house on the corner. One started to run, and the other pulled out a pistol and shot him down, then shot him again. We both looked at each other in shock. We told some adults on the trip, and they told us we had not seen that and that it never happened. Update. It was February 16, 2005. Our flight left at around 3 in the morning, the flight not being long from Northern California. When we got on the bus, which was as big as a Greyhound, from the airport, everyone fell asleep. It was still dark out. My best friend and I were not tired. The gunshots were not loud. I grew up around guns. The two adults we told were not our parents, but chaperones. They acted like we were making it up, but we know what we saw. To this day, I feel like they were just ignorant adults. There were no iPhones, so we took all our pictures for the trip on disposable cameras and Nikons. We were headed to the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress Youth Day. We were not religious, but we went for the Disneyland trip. We got to miss school and go to Disneyland. It seemed worth sitting through a day of things we had no attachment to. I have since researched murders in the area and never found a thing. Story 3. About a year ago, I was up watching movies late at night when I got hungry and went downstairs for a snack. My room is across from my daughter's room, and her door was open. As I was coming back upstairs, I started turning left toward my room when I heard clear as ever, "Daddy, can you close the door?" I turned around, did not say much, and just closed it. Once I was back in my room, I lay down to watch television when it hit me. My daughter was not there. She was spending the night at my parents' house. I got up and went to her room, and sure enough, it was empty. I woke up my wife, and she thought I was imagining things. She said I was probably tired and maybe it was the television. But I remember the voice so clearly, and it came from the direction of her room. It is very possible that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it definitely made me question a few things. Story 4. My wife and I were driving through northern Arizona on Highway 89 between Flagstaff and Page. It was about 1 in the morning, as we were on third shift at the time and often drove at night to avoid traffic. I saw a few sets of eyes glowing in my headlights a little ways up the road, so I let off the gas, slowing down to avoid hitting an animal in the road. When we drove by, we saw several dogs, maybe coyotes, on the side of the road, and I hit the gas and drove past. After we passed, my wife said one of them was running next to the car, and I looked over and saw it as well, probably 20 feet off the shoulder of the road. I floored it and looked over again, and it stood up on its hind legs, which is the only way I can describe it, and kept pace with us for a couple of seconds before turning away from the road and disappearing. This whole event probably lasted no more than 10 seconds, but it was seriously the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. This was probably 20 years ago, and we still rarely talk about it. Story 5. About 4 years ago, I was at work late dealing with some closing issues. It took longer than usual, so I ended up being the last to leave, and it was pretty late at around 8 in the evening. My workplace is not in the middle of nowhere, nor is it in a bad part of town. It is in a normal, nice area, but usually abandoned after 7 in the evening. When I got outside, I hopped in my car and prepared to pull out into the street. As I stopped and looked both ways, I suddenly noticed two figures standing to my left on the sidewalk. The thing is, they were both dressed in whitish bodysuits from head to toe and rapidly approaching my car, heading straight for the driver's door with little room to mistake their intent, whatever it might have been. I slammed the gas pedal and turned down the street as fast as I could. My mirror showed them both moving my way on foot, which alarmed me since I live in the nearby neighborhood, barely a 5-minute walk from there. I did not think beyond getting home and locking the door. Nobody else was on the street, near the parking lot, or anywhere. My town is not known for dangerous people or strange behavior. But that truly scared me. Two strangers in head-to-toe bodysuits. It was not Halloween, and they looked suspicious as anything, but nobody else saw them. Story 6. One time our family dog ran away. He was super shy and scared very easily, as we had gotten him from an animal testing laboratory. So we gathered all the friends and family we could, and shortly after he ran, there were numerous search parties, altogether about 24 people looking for him. After a whole day of searching without any sign of the dog, the sun was slowly setting. I was standing on the edge of the forest where I had searched and called all day, when suddenly I saw a deer just 15 meters from me, staring directly into my eyes. We stared at each other for at least a minute. No movement and no sound. Then I asked in a soothing voice, "Did you happen to come across a lost beagle?" I swear, to this day the deer nodded and looked down at the ground where it was standing. Then it jumped away into the woods. I thought to myself that I had imagined the nod and that the dog could not possibly be sitting next to the deer without making any noise. But I could not resist checking. And yes, there he was, sitting in the exact spot, scared to death and shaking with fear. I gasped, cuddled the dog, took him in my arms, and looked back into the woods where the deer had disappeared. There it was again, staring at me directly in the eyes. I had tears of joy and felt unbelievably grateful, while at the same time utterly confused. Since that day, I have never eaten deer again. Story 7. When I was about 15 years old on a school night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I remember looking at the clock. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I went to the kitchen to make some hot tea to take back to bed with me. Our kitchen was attached to the dining room, which was a step down from the kitchen. Both the kitchen and the dining room had large sliding glass doors and big windows facing the backyard, all on the same wall. The cabinets and counter where we kept the tea were opposite the wall of windows, forming a little corner. I remember walking into the kitchen with the lights off, going to the tea corner, and then standing in the corner looking at the windows and sliding glass doors. I felt like someone was watching me through them. I got that gut feeling. You know the one. I stood there for about a minute, very still, as if maybe they would not see me if I did not move. Then I went back to my room without making the tea. When I got back to my room, the clock read 5 in the morning. I had been standing in the kitchen for 3.5 hours. I had no idea how that was possible, because it only felt like maybe a minute. To this day, it is still the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. My mom never believed me when I told her, because she never felt anything bad in our house. I never did either, but that night I absolutely did. Story 8. I was once waiting for the metro in Shanghai and saw a woman in tears frantically run past. She stopped suddenly and seemed to be searching for a train on either platform, but there was none coming. She was yelling something, but I did not speak the language, so I could not understand. She then ran into the nearby bathroom. About 30 seconds later, 2 men in ordinary clothes came rushing down the escalator. They were shouting, but again I did not know what. They began walking up and down the track yelling, and then went into the bathroom where the woman was seemingly hiding. A few seconds later, they emerged, dragging the woman away. She was screaming, crying, and fighting desperately to get away from them. The men just kept yelling back at her, shaking her violently, and striking the back of her head while they forcibly carried her up the stairs. Everyone on the platform just stared in shock, mouths open, but no one did anything. And then, mere seconds later, the entire scene was over, and people were back to staring at their phones as if nothing had just happened. Story 9. My sister saw something on several occasions throughout our lives. Though I never actually saw anything, only heard something extremely vividly. One night everything was happening as usual. My mom was out with her friends watching a game, and my dad was watching a comedy movie with my sister and me. We went to bed laughing about it. I was lying in bed about half an hour later, reading a book, when I heard somebody stomping down the hallway downstairs and then sprinting up the stairs. I figured it was just my sister getting a drink, but our doors are right beside each other, and the staircase is just around the corner, so I would have seen her. Then I thought maybe it was my mom coming home and being unusually loud. The way my door was angled let me see anyone coming up the stairs, so I watched as the footsteps grew closer, but as soon as they reached the top, they completely stopped. There was nothing. I got up to check, turned the corner, and nobody was there. Immediately, I was covered in goosebumps, trying to piece together what had happened. Not even 2 seconds later, my sister screamed and bolted out of her room with complete terror on her face. Without hesitation, we ran into our dad's room, where he was already standing up asking what was wrong. My sister pointed back to her room, crying, and said, "There's a man!" My dad rushed into the hall, turned the lights on, and checked her room, including the closet and behind everything, but found nothing. He did the same in my room and then searched the rest of the house, turning on every single light. He even called my mom, who confirmed she was still out with her friends. I could hear the loud bar atmosphere through the phone. That night, we all slept in my dad's room. Over the next 7 or so years, my sister ran out of her room crying on multiple occasions about the same man. She said he just stood in the corner and watched her. She described him as very tall, wearing a top hat and a trench coat. Like a detective, all completely black. A few years later, I stumbled upon information about the so-called Top Hat Demon, or Phantom Hat Man. Every description and drawing matched exactly what she had described that night. Story 10. It was the night before my stepmom passed away after her battle with cancer. I was 22, spending the night in bed with my 9-year-old half-brother, cuddling him and telling him that his mom was going to be okay, that it was not going to hurt anymore. Around 3 in the morning, he suddenly sat upright in bed, smiled, and said, "I promise to be a good boy, Mommy. I love you." Now my stepmom had been bedridden for the last month, unable to move anywhere. But I swear on my life, and my little brother agrees with me, for a split second I saw her standing in the doorway, wearing her big fur coat, just smiling at us and looking relieved. My brother went back to sleep about 2 minutes later. I left to go into my dad and stepmom's room, only to find my dad awake and telling me she had passed about half an hour earlier. I genuinely believe she stopped by on her way to the other side to check in on her 2 kids and make sure we would be okay without her before she left. Story 11. I was working at a bakery on third shift, from 8 in the evening to 4 in the morning, at the local orchard. The store closed at 8, but it was not unusual for the owners to come in after closing. I had been working there for about a week at that point. I was stocking the shelves near the end of my shift, probably around 3 in the morning. I turned to take something off the rack, and there was a man standing by the cold case. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, bald, thin to average build, wearing a red flannel shirt tucked into jeans. He said, "Hello, how are you?" I replied, "Hi, I'm doing well, how are you?" He said, "I'm fine, thank you." I placed the bread on the shelf, turned to introduce myself, and he was gone. I had only turned for a few seconds, so there was no way he could have left my line of sight without me seeing some part of him, and I never heard any doors open or close. When I got home, I told my mom because I worried someone might have broken in. I said it was strange because he had just been standing there, looking at a covered cold case he could not see into, and he did not seem like he was trying to steal anything. She told me it was probably just the owner. I met the owner a few days later, but it was not him. It was not anyone who worked there. Later, I heard from co-workers that the owner was still running the place because his son, who was supposed to take over, had died of cancer. That night after work, I looked up the son's obituary online, and I swear it was the exact man I had seen in the store. Story 12. I grew up in an old house in a small town, and a lot of strange things happened there. The first I remember was when I was 6 years old and woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. I climbed down from the top bunk and saw an old man sitting in a rocking chair by the door. I tried to wake my sister in the bottom bunk, but she would not wake up and felt like dead weight. I gathered the courage to run past him, out the door, and I fell asleep in the bathroom with the light on. In the morning, my mom scolded me for it. My dad also said he thought something was wrong with the house because he often heard children playing and laughing when he got ready for work in the morning. He left around 5:30, waking up around 4. One morning, he said he heard laughter coming from the corner of the kitchen into the hallway. When he went to check, he saw a glimpse of someone running into the living room. He followed but ended up back at the kitchen with no one there. When he checked our rooms, we were all asleep. My mom also said she would sometimes see someone staring at her out of the corner of her eye when she was alone. As we grew older, we used to try to scare our friends with these stories. One day a friend brought her Furby, this was the late 1990s, and we were playing with it in the bedroom. It started acting strange, making distorted sounds like the batteries were dying. Then it shut off with its eyes closed and would not respond. I told my friend we had spare batteries downstairs. As we left the room with the Furby in hand, it suddenly popped its eyes open and said, "I tricked you." We screamed and dropped it. Story 13. It is not that people do not believe me. It is more that I hardly believe it myself. It was late, probably between 1 and 3 in the morning, and I was sitting at an intersection waiting for the light to turn green. Across from me was a dark road with trees on either side, thick woods to the left, and houses to the right. I was sitting there listening to music when I noticed movement at the edge of the woods to my left. This is rural New Jersey, so things moving in the woods are usually bears or deer, which are not scary, but deer can seriously damage your car if they run out in front of you. I turned on my high beams to see what it was, but they did not reach the woods. Then I saw more movement just before the light turned green. I made my left turn and drove off, but I never got a clear look. The next day, I drove the same route on my way to work, and when I reached that intersection, there were police cars and an ambulance at the edge of the woods where I had seen the movement the night before. I asked a coworker what had happened, and he told me they had found dismembered body parts there early that morning. Story 14. I was driving with my girlfriend through Wisconsin on the way back home. It was really late, around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I stopped at a gas station to fill up. My GPS ended up putting me on a small highway instead of the expressway right after leaving, but I did not want to complicate things, so I just followed it. My girlfriend was sleeping, so I had the radio off and was driving in silence on this really dark, eerie highway. There were deer crossing signs, so I was being extra cautious because a family friend had recently hit a deer in her truck, which caused major damage and even broke her arm from the impact. As I approached a sharp curve, I slowed down to make the turn carefully, and that is when I saw a figure emerging from the darkness of the woods. It was a large mountain lion with blood covering the front of its face. It terrified me. I pulled over just after the turn and tried to wake my girlfriend up. In my rearview mirror, I could see its large shadow crossing the road, but by the time she woke up, it was gone. She had lived in Wisconsin most of her life and immediately dismissed my claim that it was a mountain lion, insisting they are not really found in that area. I told her I knew what I saw, but she said I must have been seeing things. I pretended she was probably right and continued driving home. But deep down, I know what I saw. Story 15. I was deer hunting with a friend on some property my uncle owns in a remote area. It is right off a main road with only a couple of trailer homes along the side. And to get to the tree stand, it is a good 20 minutes walking up and down hills through thick forest. Let me paint a picture. At the base of the last hill is our two-person tree stand for hunting, then about 100 feet of land to the lake. This part is thin, about 60 feet, creating a peninsula jutting out from the land to our left with the rest of the lake behind it. About 45 minutes before sunrise, we start hearing knocking sounds from the tip of the peninsula that sounded like male deer fighting with their antlers. We got excited, thinking there were at least 2 bucks out there. Then we heard the knocking coming from the other end of the peninsula as well. We thought, no way, 4 bucks. The knocking continued for a few minutes, but it was too precise to be deer fighting. I noticed when one on the right clicked once, the other clicked once. When one clicked twice, the other clicked twice. They were directly mimicking each other. It was not an echo. They were spaced too far apart. It was not instant, and the volume was the same. Over the next few minutes, the knocking sounds came closer together. Then for about 10 minutes, silence. Out of nowhere, we heard something like an animal dying on the peninsula, almost like a wounded dog yelping. Then a loud thud, and all went quiet. We looked at each other, unsure what to say. I stood up and yelled, "Who's out there?" Then came the most blood-curdling noise I have ever heard. It started as a low, deep growl and turned into a high, raspy howl, and my blood instantly went cold. My friend and I looked at each other and said, "What was that?" at the same time. I yelled again, something like, "You better get out of here." Whatever it was howled once more and took off through the woods, and I swear I could feel its footsteps. Whatever it was bipedal. I have taken many tracking and hunting classes. I grew up in the woods. I know what a running deer sounds like. This was on 2 legs. It crashed through the cattails on the edge of the lake, and through the bare winter trees, We could see the movement and how fast it tore through at least a foot of mud and cattails. We did not say a word, got down one at a time, while the other pointed a gun at the noise and walked out backwards. We left and called everyone we knew, but as college kids, none of our friends were awake. Nobody believed us. Later that afternoon, I wanted to go back to see if I could find tracks in the mud where it had run. My friend refused, so I went alone. When I got to the cattails, something had already been there. A large branch had been dragged across the mud, wiping away all the footprints, and was left lying beside them in the woods. It has been about 5 years since then. I have been back maybe twice, always armed and never alone. Story 16. When I was in El Salvador, we went to visit my grandpa up in the mountains. There were a lot of rumors that a dried-up stream next to his house was haunted, that you could hear the cries of the dead and even see the devil walk there at night. I did not think much of it. That day we left the city late, and to get there we had to walk because there were not many roads. We finally arrived around 2 in the morning. As my grandpa was about to open the door, we turned off our lamps. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness, and I could see the dried stream bed, the rocks, and the mountains under the moonlight. As I was looking around, I suddenly saw a figure by a tree. At first I thought it was a drunk man, but then it stood up, taller than anything I had ever seen, blacker than the night itself, and started swaying from left to right. I could not believe it, so I touched my cousin and whispered, "Do you see that by the tree?" He looked, whispered, and flashed his light. There was nothing there. The rest of that night I felt uneasy. I eventually fell asleep, but around 5 in the morning, I woke to a flock of crows making noise, and the sound of hooves striking rocks in the stream. I started crying. I was very young and terrified. The houses there are made of clay and tree trunks, so you can sometimes see through the walls, which made it even scarier. That night traumatized me. My grandpa, through all of this, tried to reassure me nothing was wrong, but it felt suspicious because he kept a rifle by his side as he slept. Story 17. I am returning from a long Reddit break to share this. Back in college, I was hanging out in a friend's room when he and his roommate said they needed to move their cars to different lots, which would take about 45 minutes. I decided to stay behind and watch some television. A few minutes after they left, I noticed a DVD in a clear case labeled Mausoleum. I put it on and remember watching the creepiest movie I have ever seen. It was British, filmed entirely in black and white, and featured disturbing scenes, violent encounters, werewolves, mental asylums, grotesque human sacrifices, horrific deaths, a soundtrack like a haunted calliope, on an unsettling shifts in perspective and time periods, from the present to the 1700s. There were long monologues delivered directly to the camera, a chilling scene where a serial killer explained who his next victims would be and why, and repeated cutaways to flowers blooming and wilting atop headstones, shown in color against the otherwise black and white film. I eventually shut the movie off before it ended, stood up, and realized it was already daylight. My friend and his roommate had returned and were asleep. When they woke up, they asked how I got inside because they swore I had not been there when they returned, and said I had not answered my phone. I went to take the DVD out of the player, but the case was empty. They claimed they had never heard of or seen it before. For decades, I have tried to make sense of this. I have had nightmares, flashbacks, and even brought it up in therapy with no resolution. I still wonder if anyone else has ever seen or heard of this film or experienced something like it. Story 18. I was working at a convenience store on the late shift. Hardly anyone came in from about 10:45 until closing at midnight. The setup was small. From behind the counter, I was only about 6 feet from the front door to my left, and directly above the door were 2 security monitors. The monitors cycled through different camera angles: the back, the lot, the shed, the coolers, just outside the front door, and then repeated. I was alone, just me and my phone. Around 20 minutes passed without anyone coming in. I glanced at the security monitor, which was on the lot view. The angle showed the lot in such a way that you could also see someone's back as they entered the front door. It was dark outside, so the cameras were the best way to know if a customer was coming in. The feed was slightly delayed, so I would see something on the monitors a second or two after it happened. When the lot angle came up again, I saw a man from behind step through the front door. A black man, not too tall, wearing a leather jacket, carrying a grocery bag in his right hand. I glanced down at the actual door, which was just below the monitors. Nobody was there. I thought maybe it was a glitch or an old tape replaying, so I watched another full cycle of the cameras, about 45 seconds. Halfway through, the door suddenly swung open, and in walked a young black man, not too tall, wearing a leather jacket, holding a grocery bag in his right hand. Exactly what I had just seen on the monitor. He did not buy anything, just looked around for a minute and left. My mind may have been playing tricks on me, but I was terrified. After that night, I never worked another late shift again. Story 19. I have told this story a few times to friends, and it never fails to give me goosebumps. During high school, my girlfriend and I were headed to the school dance. We lived in a small Texas town. My graduating class was only 120 people. She picked me up and we grabbed dinner before the dance. The meal went by faster than expected, so we had about an hour to kill. Driving back roads near her house, she told me she had found the perfect makeout spot. My younger brain did not think about how illegal or dangerous it was to trespass out in the middle of nowhere. We pulled into what used to be a driveway. The first 40 feet were gravel, then it turned to dirt, overgrown with grass and clearly unused for years. A field stretched to our left, thick woods to the right, with 3 large gravel piles between us and the trees. She parked facing the exit, a small detail that ended up being important. She shut the car off and we hopped into the back seat. About an hour passed before we were ready to leave. As we got dressed, she said she really needed to pee. My nerves were already on edge. It was pitch black, the car was off, and all the doors were unlocked. I told her it was not a good idea, but she was stubborn. I will never forget how slowly her hand reached for the door handle, almost like she was waiting for something to happen. Just as her fingertips touched it, a crisp knocking sound came from the back of the car. It was clearly knuckles tapping against the trunk. 10 seconds of perfect rhythm. There were no trees or anything else that could have caused it. We froze, holding each other, barely breathing. Then silence. I tried to look outside, but it was so dark I could not even see her face clearly. "What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know. Start the car," I said, my voice shaking. "Babe, please start the car." She whispered back, "I can't move." The second she went quiet, the knocking started again. Same rhythm, same knuckles on metal. I snapped. In 3 seconds, I jumped into the front seat, started the car, locked the doors, flipped on the headlights, buckled my seatbelt, and floored it. I sped that Toyota Corolla like I was in NASCAR, hitting 50 as I tore out of that driveway, gravel flying behind us. I drove 2 miles before stopping at an electric plant. She got out to use the bathroom while I sat in the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably. We drove to the dance in silence. It was my first time driving a car outside of a parking lot. At the dance, we sat in the corner. I do not remember what we even said, only that I never wanted to go back there. Or so I thought. Near the end of the night, one of my best friends asked about it. When I explained, she insisted we go back. The next day around noon, she picked me up and we returned. In daylight, the place was even more secluded than I remembered. No houses, no buildings, nothing. The tire marks from the night before were still fresh, but what made my stomach drop were the boot prints. 2 side by side, right behind the back left tire. They led from the overgrown brush to the car and back again. My friend could tell I was uneasy, so we left. A couple of months later, my girlfriend and I broke up for unrelated reasons. We went to different colleges, but sometimes she visits old high school friends. I saw her last semester, and after catching up, I asked, "Do you ever think about that time?" She cut me off, her smile gone. "I don't think about it. Ever. And I don't want to." That was the last time we spoke of it. Story 20. There is this place called Apple Hill, a popular local attraction in the valley. It is basically a cute little family destination where you go to pick apples and other fruit. I went there with my family when I was 11. My cousins, my sister, and I were busy picking raspberries. We turned it into a competition. Who could collect the most berries? We spread out quickly, and before long, I was fairly far from everyone else. I was so focused on picking that I did not realize how far I had gone. Suddenly, everything got very quiet. I could barely hear my family's voices. Then a giant gust of wind pushed against my back. I turned around and noticed a small hut not too far away. It was too big to be a shed, but not large enough to be a proper house. It looked old and run down. Just looking at it gave me chills. Out of nowhere, a black cat came from behind me and rubbed against my leg. I jumped. Between the creepy hut and this strange cat, I was already uneasy. The cat did not back off like most do. It was not afraid at all. It just sat beside me, staring up. Something about it felt wrong. Then the strangest thing I have ever seen happened. The wind picked up again, and a dust devil formed around the cat. I felt grains of sand brushing against me as I stepped back. The whirlwind grew thick, then cleared a bit and started to move. The cat was gone, but the dust devil drifted toward the hut. It almost felt like the wind itself was pulling me along. I wanted to follow it. The swirling dust floated into the hut, and for a moment, the place felt strangely inviting. I actually started to walk toward it, but then I heard my name being called. My sister and cousins were looking for me. When I told them what happened, none of them believed me, but none of them wanted to check out the hut either. They admitted it gave them creepy vibes just looking at it. I am not saying there is a witch at Apple Hill trying to lure kids, but there is definitely a witch at Apple Hill trying to lure kids. Story 21. I have experienced a few creepy things, but most are usually explainable. However, the clearest one I ever had happened a few years back. It was not even terrifying because I enjoy the idea of ghosts and the paranormal. I had just finished a shower one evening. It must have been winter because it was already dark. I live in a London suburb where the houses are extremely close together, but the walls are thick enough that I barely hear my neighbors. The house is fairly old. My parents were downstairs with the front room door shut, so upstairs was dead quiet. Usually my mom plays the radio in their bedroom, but not that night. I was scrubbing my hair with a towel and about to put it away in my parents' room. I opened the door, walked into the pitch-black room, and suddenly heard a somewhat posh woman's voice say, "Hello." It sounded as if I had startled her. I froze, staring into the dark, and answered, "Hello?" Nothing. The voice did not sound like my mom or any of our neighbors. The radio was off, the double-glazed windows were tightly shut, and the room was silent. But the voice had been incredibly clear and directional. It came from the back left corner near the wardrobe. I stood there staring for 5 minutes, waiting for another sound, but heard nothing. My mom later suggested it could have been someone from the family who lived in the house a century ago, and maybe me opening the door startled her the way she startled me, like I was her ghost. If that is the case, I feel bad. Story 22. I have an uncle who used to go on weekend hunting trips by himself. He would head deep into the wilderness, usually for squirrel hunting, staying out 3 or 4 days alone. About 4 years ago, he stopped going alone. He came back early from one trip swearing he had seen a little boy running around in the woods. Ever since then, he only goes in larger groups of 5 or 6 and always pairs up with someone. He also never stays as long. The spots he visited were off-road mountain areas, far from campsites or other people. According to him, he had been walking to find a good spot when he heard what sounded like a little boy laughing. He paused and scanned the trees, then suddenly saw a boy in the distance run across a clearing. He swears it was a boy because the child was wearing a blue jacket. It lasted only a few seconds, like a quick glimpse, but it looked like the boy was playing hide and seek. The moment left him with an intense, uneasy feeling. He kept staring, but the boy was gone. He turned around and walked back immediately. My uncle is convinced it was not just campers or another hunter with a child. In all his years, he had never run into anyone else in that spot. To him, it was a major event. He has hunted his whole life and is not the type to get spooked by random forest noises. Whatever he saw out there changed him. Story 23. My cousins and I decided to explore a seemingly abandoned house just off the road. Inside, we were surprised to see the power was still on. The refrigerator stood open, and in the middle of the kitchen table was an open jewelry box, everything neatly arranged. The living room walls were lined with stacks of magazines about 4 feet high. One bedroom contained only a twin bed, perfectly made but completely covered in horse show ribbons, all carefully ordered and lined up. Another bedroom was bare except for mounted taxidermy animals. While in that room, we heard a thud from the attic and bolted out of the house. As I ran down the street, I glanced back and saw a shed made of cinder blocks with no roof. Standing in its open doorway was a tall, black silhouette of a man. It was noon. No shadows, no roof, no door. Yet it moved. Later, one of the girls admitted she had taken a pearl necklace. I knew this was a bad idea and told her to return it. I watched from the driveway as she placed the necklace on a deep freezer near the back door. Just as she turned to leave, something shoved her 3 feet backward, knocking her flat. She had not tripped. She was clearly pushed by nothing. Being a good cousin, I took off running faster than ever. She swore something shoved her down. Since that day, I have never stepped foot inside another abandoned house. Story 24. I was upstairs playing on my computer one night while my wife was out with her sisters. Suddenly, my dogs went crazy barking, so I figured my wife had pulled into the driveway. I waited to hear the front door, but after a few minutes of nonstop barking, I grew concerned. Both dogs were at the top of the stairs, barking down at the front door. As I turned the corner, I froze. There was a figure standing in the darkness, looking up the stairs. I shouted, "What the hell?" and ran to grab my phone. My dogs went frantic, scrambling backward on the wood floor, paws sliding, as if terrified of something unseen. Their heads tracked movement as if something was coming up the stairs, over the railing, and into the guest bedroom. They both locked their gaze into that room. Walter, my usually sweet boy, was baring his fangs like a wolf. Ellie, just 9 months old, barked with all her strength while urinating in fear. I stood in shock at their reaction when suddenly I heard a strange noise, like the buffeting sound you hear in a car when only 1 or 2 windows are rolled down. It lasted about 15 seconds. When it stopped, my dog stopped barking and charged into the guest room, searching. We have had odd things happen in this house before, but nothing this terrifying. What made it worse was when my wife and her sisters mocked me for calling her, asking her to come home. She did not believe me then. She does now. Story 25. When I was little, my mom redecorated my entire room in a Teletubbies theme. Curtains, lamps, sheets, stickers, everything was Teletubbies. I even had life-size pillows of each character that I slept with every night. I always kept my door open because I was scared of the dark. One night I started seeing colorful figures the size of those pillows standing in my doorway. I screamed and cried until my mom came running in. I told her I had seen colorful men in the hallway, but she reassured me it was nothing and stayed with me until I fell back asleep. It happened again the next night and the night after. Almost every night I would see colorful figures, or ones that looked exactly like the pillows, standing in my doorway. I would cry, scream, and beg for my mom. Finally, she decided to get rid of everything and gave it all to a family friend. After that, I never had the problem again. I honestly forgot all about it. Years later, in a random conversation with my mom, she reminded me of my Teletubby-themed room. She told me the family friend had taken everything. Their house had 6 people living in it, including 2 special needs girls. They were capable of conversation, but needed help with daily living, so they could not live independently. According to my mom, once that family brought my old things into their home, weird things started happening. The special needs girls began seeing figures in the basement, which had been converted into a bedroom using all of my old Teletubby stuff. Radios turned on and off while unplugged. Televisions switched channels by themselves. Objects moved without explanation, and strange noises echoed through the house. Then tragedy struck. The house caught fire. A little girl visiting that day panicked and ran into a closet when people tried to get her to jump out. She died in the fire. I had met her just days before. To this day, I cannot shake how strange it was that all of that happened right after they brought my old things into their home. Story 26. When I was 19 in a small college town, there wasn't much to do except wander around Walmart or try to spook ourselves. The town had a reputation for witches, so stumbling across abandoned buildings, altars, or strange symbols was not unusual. One of our favorite thrills was exploring the sewers downtown. They were large enough for 6 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, with ankle-deep water running through them. The tunnels twisted into a maze covered in creepy graffiti, and sometimes we found small chambers with altars or remnants of sacrifices. Occasionally, we even ran into other groups, which always made us hide. The last time I ever went, there were 5 of us. We had been exploring for about 2 hours when we heard voices echoing closer. We ducked behind a pile of rocks about 4 feet tall and 10 feet wide, turned off our flashlights and waited. Soon we saw the flicker of firelight bouncing down the tunnel. 3 people appeared, all dressed in black. One carried a torch, giving the whole scene an eerie Indiana Jones temple vibe. They got within 20 feet of us, then stopped at a plain concrete wall. The man with the torch placed his hand on it. To our shock, the wall began to move. It folded inward with a heavy mechanical sound, like a massive concrete door grinding open. The three walked through, and the wall closed solidly behind them. After they left, we scrambled over to investigate. There was no seam, no divot, no hidden opening. The wall was smooth and solid. We pressed, pushed, and even imitated the man's hand motion. But nothing happened. Eventually, we left in silence, each of us shaken. To this day, I have no explanation for what we saw, but I know 4 other people witnessed it with me. Story 27. I work in a train yard at night, shuttling crews around to and from trains. This yard is not well lit in some places, leaving large areas in total darkness. It is a small depot out in the boonies. One night, I was sitting next to a locomotive, waiting for the crew to hop off so I could take them back to the office. I was parked at the edge of the light, and about 25 to 30 feet away was pure blackness, except for my headlights. To my left were 4 sets of tracks and a grassy field beyond them. To my right was a steep embankment leading down to a creek. The gravel road I was on stretched into the dark. As I sat there, I saw a fox sprint from the tracks, across the road, and down the slope like it was hunting. I leaned over to see where it went, then sat back up, and there was someone standing just beyond the light. It was darker than the rest of the night, like black on black, but it was huge, Andre the Giant huge. I could not make out details, but it seemed to be moving closer without becoming clearer. I turned on my high beams, but nothing changed. The figure kept moving toward me. My chest tightened, and I grabbed the radio, calling for the crew. In those few seconds, I swear, the thing grinned. Its mouth was massive, wider than I thought a human mouth could be, practically glowing in the dark. A second later, the crew answered, asking what was wrong. I told them I thought someone was walking toward us. They hit the locomotive's lights, flooding the area with brightness. Nothing. Nobody was there, just empty tracks and road. They shut everything down, climbed off, and I drove them back to the office. I told them I was certain something had been in front of me. They had one of the clerks check the security footage. The cameras clearly showed the fox crossing the tracks, me turning on my high beams, then the engine lights. Nothing else. I apologized, but they said it was fine. Better to report something than ignore it. That was 7 or 8 months ago, and I still avoid that stretch. I have not seen it again, but I cannot forget that grin. Story 28. When I was younger, I used to get sick often. My parents thought I just had a weak immune system, and I believed it too since I was overweight for my age. One week, I stayed home from school with a fever and a pounding headache that would not go away. I could not eat or sleep, so I spent my days watching VHS tapes. After a couple of days without proper rest, I got desperate and decided to take sleeping medicine. I turned on my lamp and kept it on, because I have always been scared of sleeping in the dark. Tom and Jerry played on the television while I waited for the medicine to work. Soon I started to feel drowsy, which felt like a huge relief. But then my body felt strange, as if someone had rubbed icy hot across every inch of my skin. I tried to ignore it, desperate for sleep. My eyes grew heavy, and I drifted closer to slumber. Suddenly, my right leg lifted on its own, as though I had raised it, but I had not. Fear washed over me, but the sleepiness was so strong I tried to ignore it. Then I felt someone tug on my arm, like a child pulling at you to come play. I turned my head, and there she was, a very young, pale girl standing beside my bed. We locked eyes for several seconds before I burst into tears, terrified. I reached for the remote, ready to throw it, but when I turned back, she was gone. And with her disappearance, so were my symptoms. The fever vanished, the headache was gone, and the strange icy hot sensation covering my body had disappeared. It was as if she had taken it all with her. Story 29. When I was 9, I lived in a trailer with my mother, stepfather, brother, and sister. We were always scaring each other, jumping out from bedroom doorways whenever someone walked down the hall. Because of that, I was always on edge, especially when going into my room in the dark. I hated walking into a pitch-black bedroom, so I always reached in to flip the light switch before entering. One night, as I reached in, somebody grabbed my hand. I screamed at the top of my lungs and bolted straight to the living room, convinced it was my brother or sister playing a prank. But when I got there, everyone, my brother, my sister, my stepfather, was sitting in the living room with my mom. They all stared at me in confusion, asking why I screamed. I couldn't even get the words out. I just broke down crying. Over the years, I have seen things that still make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, but that was the only time I ever felt something physically touch me. I know it was not in my head. Something grabbed my hand. I am 46 now, and it still brings tears to my eyes just remembering it. Story 30. I will preface this by saying I do not believe in supernatural things. I trust logic, reason, and evidence. But this one shook me. On the edge of my property, there is a trailer that gets rented out from time to time. One winter, the tenants moved out but left a light on in the back bedroom. It shined blue through the blinds. Every night when I took my dog outside, I noticed it. For 3 days, it glowed. The landlords eventually came by to clean and inspect the place. I assumed the light would be off after that, but that night it was still on. Months went by, and every single night, the light was there. It became routine for me to stand outside with my dog, staring at that glow. I finally walked closer, about 10 feet away, and studied the blinds. They were bent, with a crease that allowed me to peek inside. That is when I realized it wasn't a lamp at all. It was a television left on, stuck on the AV1 input screen, glowing solid blue. The room inside looked strange. Plastic sheets everywhere on the floor, and a broken doll lying there. For some reason, that image unsettled me so deeply that I had to call a friend, though I didn't even explain why. That night, I tried to shake it off by watching Futurama in bed. Eventually, I fell asleep. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up to the same solid blue glow filling my room. Disoriented, I realized my own television had turned on to the AV1 input screen, the exact same solid blue. My remote was beside me untouched. It had never happened before and has never happened since. The timing was too much. The next night, I dreaded going outside. When I finally did, the trailer light was gone. After nearly 6 months of that blue light shining every night, the very night I finally peeked inside was the last time it was ever on. And it was also the night my own bedroom glowed the same eerie blue. Story 31. I am a restaurant manager, and one night while closing, I went to the dining room to check if the server was almost done sweeping the floors. I walked down the hallway, and as I stepped out into the dining room, I saw the server standing there frozen in place. I looked at him and then followed his gaze toward the exit door that led to the parking lot. The door had blinds on it, and the cord used to pull them up and down was sticking straight out, perfectly horizontal. I froze too, staring at it, trying to understand how in the world that was possible. It hung there like someone was holding it pulled tight. I muttered, "What the hell?" And that snapped the server out of his trance. He looked back at me with wide eyes, and we both silently confirmed that we were seeing the exact same thing. Then, right as we stared at it, the cord wiggled slightly, then dropped, snapping against the glass with a loud crack. That was it. We both screamed, sprinted back into the kitchen, and tried explaining to the cooks what just happened. They laughed and didn't believe us. When we dragged them out to see, the cord was just hanging normally, like nothing had ever been wrong. To this day, the server and I both tell the story, and nobody ever believes us. But I swear there is no natural explanation for what we saw that night. Story 32. About 2 years ago, when my son was 4.5, he invented an imaginary friend named Blossie. Blossie was a purple cube who drove an invisible rainbow car. At the time, I was pregnant with our daughter, and Blossie came into existence then. Even after she was born, Blossie stayed around. 6 months later, my son turned 5, and we had a big party with family and friends. 3 days later, on my birthday actually, while putting him to bed, he suddenly became inconsolable. He cried and told us that Blossie's light had gone out and could not be turned back on. Nothing we said could calm him. We figured maybe it was his way of letting go of his imaginary friend, or just that he was overtired, but eventually he fell asleep. 2 days after that, we found my father-in-law's body in the shower. He had died of an aortic dissection. He had survived one 6 years earlier, but the repair hadn't lasted. Because it was winter and the heat was on, his body had been under cold running water for who knows how long, so the coroner used the day we found him as his day of death. But after checking his work schedule and missed deadlines, It was clear he had actually died the same night Blossie's light went out. We had not mentioned that detail to anyone until after his death, so no one really believes us when we say the timing was exact. My son was very close to his grandfather, and losing him was hard, but he also lost Blossie that night. To this day, he says Blossie is on Saturn with his band. Saturn had always been his grandfather's favorite planet, and my son, who is obsessed with space, talks about it like it is perfectly natural. Story 33. Years ago, a friend and I were taking a road trip to Santa Cruz. We put the address for the boardwalk into my Garmin and followed it since neither of us knew the area. I was driving, but the longer I drove, the stranger it felt. The Garmin kept leading us deeper into a forest. At one point, I had my friend double-check the address, and it was correct. Still, we were going further into the woods. I am terrible with directions, so I thought maybe this road somehow looped to the coast. After about 30 minutes, the Garmin directed us down a winding one-lane road leading into a valley. The trees were so dense we could not even see the valley floor, and the switchbacks went on endlessly. By then, I was sure we were lost, but there was no safe place to turn around. When we finally reached the bottom, the place was unsettling. It looked like an abandoned mining site with huge rusted equipment and trash scattered in the wind. My Garmin announced we had arrived at our destination. My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances. The place gave off a terrible vibe. We wanted out immediately. As I turned the car around, a man stepped out of one of the abandoned buildings. He looked like something out of Deliverance, holding what looked like a pipe in his hand. He just stood there staring intensely at our car as I floored it back up the road. The drive out was tense until we finally got out of the forest. Later, when we told our friends in Santa Cruz about it, they had no idea what road we were describing. They thought we were exaggerating, but we both knew exactly what we saw. Story 34. When my grandmother died, I was 19. She was my best friend, the one who practically raised me, the only person who ever truly showed me unconditional love. Losing her left me feeling completely alone. She had suffered for a long time with late-diagnosed cancer, the kind now linked to talcum powder that you hear about on television. I was devastated, unable to cope with the emptiness left behind. Not long after her passing, I was walking down the boulevard when something incredible happened. Suddenly, I saw her face before me. But she looked much younger, like in the photos I had seen of her after she first married. She was radiant, perfect. She was in a beautiful garden, overflowing with peace and happiness beyond anything on earth. I knew she was with someone she loved deeply, and I felt it was Jesus. The irony struck me because at her funeral, one of the hymns played was "I Come to the Garden Alone," a song about walking and talking with Jesus in the garden, belonging to him and the joy of that presence. The vision was so sudden, so vivid, that I knew it was not just my imagination, and after it ended, something shifted in me. I felt peace, as though I finally understood. I realized she was no longer suffering, no longer a lonely widow, no longer battling diabetes, no longer living a simple life of pain and loss. She was finally happy, truly happy, in a way she had never been here. How could I regret that for her? From that moment on, I felt stronger, like I could go on without fear. I knew I would be okay, even without her. It felt like I had been given a small glimpse of grace, just enough to help me understand and move forward with peace in my heart. Story 35. When I was 18, serving in the Finnish army, I was about 3/4 through my 6-month service when this happened. We were in the forest again with all our gear for another week of training. The area was unsettling. Some houses were still lived in, but others were completely abandoned, and we were allowed to use the outhouses in the empty places. After one mission, when everyone was eating and complaining as usual, I needed to use the bathroom. I asked my lieutenant for permission, and he gave me directions. It was about 1 in the morning, snow on the ground, pitch dark except for my weak flashlight since my main one had been damaged. It felt like a setup for a horror movie. I followed the directions past a creepy abandoned house, down the road about 50 meters, and was supposed to turn left when I saw the outhouse. I walked at least 150 meters, still nothing. Just as I was considering heading back, I heard footsteps ahead of me, fast, heavy in the snow. I panicked and hurried back, and surprisingly, I found the small, 2-room outhouse shack right before the abandoned house and main road. Relieved, I dropped my gear, vest, rifle, helmet, so I could finally use the bathroom in peace. But just before I sat down, I thought I saw a figure sprint past the shack. The sound of running footsteps in the snow was intense, like someone blazing down the road I had just walked. Freaked out, I finally sat, and the seat was warm. In the middle of a freezing night, out in the snow, that plastic seat was warm. No one believed me, and no one had left or returned while I was gone. After that, the guys in my group thought I was crazy, but I know what I felt, and it wasn't in my imagination. Story 36. When I was living in the South, I had a family friend who needed rides to and from work since there were no buses, and his job was about 20 miles away in the city. One night I went to pick him up, and he was drunk. So drunk, it eventually cost him his job. He was a cook, a talented one, but drinking was his downfall. On the ride home, he rambled about the cosmos, aliens, telepathy, all the usual drunken, deep thoughts. I had been meditating since I was a kid. At first, it was because I thought it could give me superpowers like in comic books, but as an adult, I kept it up because it helped me with depression. When I was a kid, I believed I had telekinetic powers, even pyrokinetic ones, though of course, as an adult, I no longer believe that. For some reason, I brought it up in conversation that night. My friend jumped on it, ranting about how we all have powers, then handed me his lighter and told me to prove it. I laughed it off, but decided to humor him. I flipped open the lighter, ignited the flame, and half-jokingly tried to control it like I used to imagine as a child. To my shock, the flame swayed side to side as if I were actually moving it. I immediately thought it must be my breath, or the angle, or a draft. But then I handed him the lighter, and while he held it steady, I tried again. The flame bent and stretched exactly the same way. My heart started racing. I pushed further and focused, and the flame grew. It stretched taller, thinner, 3 times its normal height. He started freaking out, and so did I. I could not believe what I was seeing. The strangest part was that he was too drunk to fully process what had just happened. His mind drifted to another topic, while I sat there terrified of what it could mean. The next day, I cautiously asked if he remembered what I did with the lighter. He said no, just that something weird had happened. I never told him. I never tried it again. Even now, I am too afraid of the implications of what that might mean. Story 37. My junior year of high school, I woke up to the sound of my radio clashing with the noise of a windstorm raking the rosebush against my window. At first, it was just annoying, but then I noticed something strange. In the gap between the shade and the window, I saw a shadow about the size of a head, hovering 5 or 6 feet up. I sat there staring at it for a minute, trying to figure out what could possibly be casting it. Then suddenly, something slammed into the window. My heart nearly stopped. The glass somehow held, but I watched as the shadow slowly dragged across the narrow gap of the window. At that point, I did the only thing that made sense. I got out of there. As I left my room, my radio, already notorious for bad reception, cut out. But in the 2 seconds of silence, I clearly heard 2 words, "Come out." That was all I needed to pick up my pace and head upstairs to tell my parents I would be sleeping in the guest room. Later that night, I somehow managed to fall asleep after shoving in headphones to block out the sound of branches scraping across the guest room window. A week later, I went out into the backyard to try to find a rational explanation. That's when I remembered. The guest room windows didn't have anything near them. No trees, no branches, nothing that could have made those dragging sounds. From then on, I never felt like I was truly alone in that room again. Story 38. When I was in 6th grade, we were in the middle of math class when something bizarre happened. Out of nowhere, all 30 of us kids sat up straight at the exact same time. We went completely still, silent, looking at each other for about 3 seconds. The air itself felt strange, almost like it was vibrating. A low, rumbling sensation crept up my spine. Later, when I asked a friend, he said he felt it too. It wasn't like normal déjà vu. It felt like experiencing someone else's memory. Someone who was both me and not me at the same time. 5 seconds into this, the teacher finally noticed 30 kids sitting in eerie silence and asked if everything was okay. As soon as she spoke, we all gasped at once and started talking again, breaking the trance. Later, we reasoned it must have been a small earthquake. They weren't unheard of where we lived, and maybe our teacher was too old to feel it. But when we asked the class next door, none of them knew what we were talking about.